Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about how to teach a group project. I'm not in this video going to talk about how to design a group project. I'll talk about that in another video. So the focus here is, what do you need to instruct your students in order for them to successfully be able to complete a group project? Because it's not necessarily obvious to students how to do this successfully if they haven't been taught. And like anything else, working collaboratively, working with others is a skill set. And so if you're going to assign group work, if you're going to assign especially a group project, one thing that you should be doing is teaching your students how to work successfully in a group. Now, I've done a video before about collaborative writing, and I'll put a link to that up in the top corner. But as an instructor, you should make time within your lessons to talk about how to approach working as a group. How you choose to organize that is up to you. Typically, what I do is I take part of a day near the beginning of the group project and I do a sort of crash course on what your group needs to be successful. There's a good argument to be made, and I think going forward when I teach group projects in the future, I'm going to still have that day where I cover a lot of that, but then in subsequent class periods, we're going to do a little bit of work in smaller chunks on what you need to do to be successful working collaboratively. So, one of the first things that you want to talk to your students about is going to be, so if you're letting your students choose their own groups, which is what I do, which is what I recommend, one of the things, I always give my students a week, at least a week and a half if I can, to solidify their groups. That depends on your schedule, whether or not you're going to be able to do that, but I want students to have the option to not just be stuck with the first group of people they get together with. Because one of the first things that I tell my students to think about is what you want out of this project. So there are going to be people in the class who will take the C's get degrees approach, and there are going to be people in the class who are going to say, I need an A. I refuse to accept less than an A on this project. If half of your group members are perfectly comfortable taking a C, and the other half want an A, it's going to be very, very difficult for everybody to be happy, because the people who want a C are not going to want to work hard enough to get an A. The people who want an A are going to be resentful of the people who are happy with just a C. So you want to try and find group members. That's, I think, one of the first things to tell your students. Try and find group members who want the same who want the same thing that you want and are willing to put in the same kind of work that you're willing to put in. The next thing that I think students need to be thinking about is what topic you want and what kinds of stakes this has for your group members. I also typically let my students choose their own topics. I think that's much better than assigning a specific topic. If you assign specific topics, that's fine. You can do that. That actually takes this step out of it. But for me, it'll be something like you're going to write a group rhetorical evaluation. Choose any kind of rhetorical text, any rhetorical focus, but you're going to work together and you're going to compose a focused argument about that rhetorical text and the techniques that that text uses. Students need to find something that they're all interested in. And so this can be a problem, particularly when students just sort of turn to the people who are sitting around them to be group members. If you don't share common interests, it can be very difficult to find something that everybody wants to work on, particularly if the project lasts several weeks or even an entire semester. So one of the things that you can do as an instructor to make this a little bit easier is if you have some sort of online platform like Canvas or Blackboard or something like this, you can set up a kind of discussion forum where people can say, this is what I'm interested in working on. These are my interests, the area I would want to work on something with. And group members can find each other based on shared interests, and groups can start coalescing around particular things that they would want to work on. So that's an option that you have that can make group work a lot easier. A lot of students will still just work with the people who happen to be sitting around them. And there's a decent chance, if you haven't assigned seating, which I don't do either, there's a decent chance that you will have already had them working on small class discussions or things like this. And so the people who are sitting around one another will already be somewhat familiar with one another. So that's not necessarily a terrible thing. One of the things you want to talk your students through is the different ways of communicating and sharing information. And I think this is this is where I get into the stuff that I talked about more in my collaborative writing video, about how do you keep in contact with one another and share information, and how do you divide up the task of writing as a group. So these are the important things that you really need to focus on. Because these are some of the big strategies and skills that students may not have experience with, but that they need to be familiar with in order to be successful in a group writing project. So typically I ask students to collectively make a list of how you might remain in contact with one another. What techniques, what tools, what technologies exist that would let you be in contact with one another to do this kind of writing project. And so they tend to come up with things like Google Docs, which is really, really good because everybody can be given editor permission on that document. And everybody can work on it, which is great. In-person meetings, email, texting, social media networks, these kinds of things. I think it's good to get them thinking about what kinds of tools and technologies are available for them, because then they can start assessing what's going to work best for them. So typically I give my students I ask my students to work in small groups, whether they're the group that they want to work with or a different group, and come up with these ideas for how you could remain in contact with one another. And then we put them all up on the board. And we talk about some of the strengths and weaknesses of them. So like, a group chat is good for staying in contact, but it doesn't necessarily lend itself to composing an actual essay. Getting together in person can be really useful because you can talk through ideas, you can work together to compose, but if people have schedules that don't align, that can be really challenging, etc., etc. So we talk through the costs and benefits of these things so that groups can start figuring out what's the best set of tools for us. Then the other big thing I think you need to talk about with your students is how to divide the task of writing. So typically I give them a few different strategies that I think are the major ones. So one is to divide the task. This works really well with essays, especially if you assign every person 1 to 2 paragraphs, or whatever it is, based on the length of the essay, and say, you're responsible for these paragraphs, and then have one person, either have one person or as a group come together and say, okay, how do we smooth this all out so it sounds like one unified essay? So that's one option, dividing the task up. Another potential approach is to have everyone just work collaboratively through the entire process. Either you set up a Google Docs or you come together in a face-to-face meeting and start drafting that essay together, and don't sort of divide the task up into discrete bits, but work collectively on it. Within that approach, you can take a couple of different strategies. One of which I tell students is you can have one designated scribe, one designated person whose job it is to write down what's being said, and everybody else can work through the ideas and can figure out exactly what they want, what the group wants to say about this topic, and the scribe writes it down. The benefit of that is that you're likely to end up with one coherent writing voice. One of the drawbacks is it may be very hard to feel like everybody has contributed equally. So if that's something the group is concerned about, this strategy is maybe risky. Another one works actually, I think, better with Google Docs than with in-person meetings, when that's just everybody contributes. Everybody can come to the document whenever they have time to work on it, and they can write whatever they want, revise what's already there, etc., etc. So that's another good way of doing it. There's other strategies. You can figure out your own techniques that make sense for you in terms of group writing or group work, but you want to talk your students through these potential strategies, including their costs and benefits, what they're good for, and what their potential challenges are, so that your students can get a good sense of what strategies make the most sense for them. Again, this is a crucial thing. Like, the temptation is, I think, often there to just say, do this group project, we're going to focus on the content of this course. But again, group work is a skill, and it's an important skill, because most of the projects, most of the work that we do involves collaboration to some degree or another. Because it's a skill, our students need to learn to do it, and so we need to teach them to do it.